Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our new Jersey Friendly Yards webinar series, our summer series with the theme Jersey Friendly by Design. And our first speaker tonight is Bruce Crawford. This topic is designing gardens to support the native web of life. And a little background about Bruce. He's a longtime proponent of unusual and fun plants. He had his own design build garden business for over 25 years that specialized in plantings for year-round interest. And then from 2005 to 2020, he was the director of Rutgers Gardens, which is the botanical garden for Rutgers University. And now he's currently the state program leader for home and public horticulture with the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station. He has also been an instructor in the landscape architecture program at Rutgers University since 1987, and he lectures frequently to various groups. So welcome, Bruce. We're so happy to have you this evening and your wealth of knowledge. So thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you, Karen. And hello, everybody. So welcome to a sort of a humid night, but it's not horrible. And hopefully you're in a nice air-conditioned building and comfortable and have a glass of something to enjoy while we go through the images. This is it's something that I've always enjoyed looking at native plants, but now that I've become more and more tuned into what I'm seeing, it's a lot more fun. And I think one of the challenges that a lot of people find when they start thinking of nature and start looking at attracting wildlife is that it's not that evident. I mean, because people sort of expect everything these days to be right in their face. They expect to have all sorts of pollinators, to see all sorts of life just sort of bouncing around the garden. And oftentimes you have to look for it. And so, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we face with what we're trying to convince people to plant native and think about caterpillars and feeding birds and the whole web of life, is that it doesn't scream at you. And so, and I sort of nicknamed this whole thing biodesign, but it's just sort of fun. But and I'm sure everyone's read this book, Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy. But he's been preaching this now for 15 years, and he just came out with a book on oaks this past spring. And it's easy reading, but it really drives a point home, and you can see the caterpillar in the bird's mouth, is that if we really want songbirds and really to encourage and increase our diversity on Earth, we need to, and wildlife, we obviously want to increase the diversity of native plant material. And so anyway, here's the wise old frog, and he just came up with the concept of biodesign. And what does that mean? Personally, I don't really know, because it's the term is only about a half a year old. But it's all about diversity. And so when we look at this hummingbird hawk moth, so it's on wild basil, which is that small purple flower, and right next to it is a selection of geranium. And I watched that hummingbird moth for quite a while, and it never went to the cranesbill, never went to the geranium, but always hovered around the wild basil. And the wild basil, this is up in Warren County, New Jersey. And it was just interesting to see how the insects were very specific in what they were looking for. And of course, this has become a bit of a status that, do we have turf and so forth? And turf is necessary. We all need a little bit of turf, but there's not a lot happening in turf. I mean, okay, you got some Japanese beetle grubs, you got some chinch bugs, but by and large, you don't have a lot compared to looking at a field like this. And so when you look at, this is out in Wisconsin, but when you look at these meadows, first of all, you notice that there's a lot of different plant material, there's a lot of different diversity, but you also notice that there is repetition of plant material. And that white flower that sort of appears throughout the field, and the purple coneflower is just coming into bloom, gives a rather calming feeling. So one of the things that we always think about is we need a big diversity of things, but actually it's been sort of shown that if you have a large population of one plant, like goldenrod, which everybody thinks is a weed, but if you have a large population, then the pollinators will come. And you think about that, and it's sort of like going out to a bar at night. And if the bar only has a 6-pack of beer left, and you're going there with 12 friends, then it's not worth your time. And the same thing is true of the pollinators. If they're going to a field and there's only a half dozen pollinator plants there, they're not going to make the journey. But if they're going somewheres and the place is loaded with pollinator plants, then they're going to make the trip. This is just sort of an interesting little diagram when you look at prairie plants and you look at the depth of the root system. Now, over on the left-hand side, right there, that's Kentucky bluegrass. And you can see that the plants have a root system, give or take, of 6 inches deep. And you look at the rest of the plant material, and it has root depths of upwards of 14 feet in depth. So that sort of gives you a perspective. Now, again, out west, the soil is a lot more sandy, and the roots have, as they go dive deeper, they actually still have oxygen, so they're able to live. But still, it gives you a feeling of, how deep it is. And when this is down in Chanticleer, which is an awesome public garden. If you have yet to go there, I highly suggest it. And one of the things that they did was they took a panel of lawn, put in tall fescue, and then planted it. Now, again, nothing here is native, but they do have pollinator plants, and you can see the sage and the Asclepias right here. And so you're having hummingbirds coming and so forth, but it is that fescue that really knits the whole design together, which I think is interesting. And then you look at longwood, and again, they have a meadow. And again, the grass is knitting the whole thing together. And a lot of people look at sedges and grasses as being a little bit weedy, but hopefully by the end of tonight, we'll look at them and say they provide a certain comfort level. They provide habitat. And there was a red-winged blackbird that was in that meadow that was one time when I was there that kept trying to chase me out. I was there in May, and she obviously had a nest, and she did not like me being anywhere near her nest. So again, there are a number of ground-dwelling birds. And this whole concept of biodiversity, it's a big word. And it was not around in 1980 when I was going to school. And I was talking to Karen earlier about our school experiences. And when you thought about the environment, it wasn't as big of a concept as it is today. And a lot of people go, wow, that's such a big concept. It's beyond me. There's no way I'm going to make an impact in biodiversity whatsoever. But they're wrong. And so these are the bees that we are trying to attract. And these are just 2 of many. And these are our native bees. And they are herbivores. And I always like to, people say, what's the difference between a wasp and a bee? Well, a wasp is a carnivore, but you'll sometimes see wasps on flowers as well. But the point being is that these are very tiny, and they oftentimes look like flies if you're not really paying attention to it. And they don't really sting you because they're solitary. So they don't have a nest, so they aren't protecting the nest. And they have a home in the ground or a home in an old tree, a dead tree or log laying on the ground, which is a good reason for leaving them there. And they won't sting you unless you actually pinch them. And so if you get one, because the sweat bees tend to get attracted to your sweat. And then if you happen to pinch them under your arms, you will feel the response. And you see how small they are right here. So this little sweat bee is on a snake root. Photographed this a couple of years ago. But this is a native plant in Warren County. And of course, the botanists keep changing the names. It used to be Cismistifuga. Now they changed it to Actea. But regardless of which, awesome plant for a flower right now. And you really have to study it, though, again, because you don't see wildlife on the plant. It just sort of looks like, oh, there's the flower, and there's nothing on it. But then when you dive a little deeper, all of a sudden you see, oh, there it is. I see it. I see it. And so we want to keep these dead trees. So this is my property last winter. 2 years ago, this tree came down in an ice storm, and we cut it up, but we just left it there because, again, that is a habitat for a lot of our native bees. Or perhaps you have a woodland garden and you just line the edge of the path with dead logs. Again, this is where your natives are going to be living. And assuming that some of your dead trees are not going to fall on the house, fall on your visitors, fall on your relatives, which we don't want that to happen. leave them standing. So they're great for woodpeckers, great for habitat. And this is again in my front yard, and it's just always interesting to see what's coming or going from a dead stand. So again, we talked about a diversity of plants, and so I'm always looking for a new fun plant to add. Joe Pye weed, and we look at it, and we go, okay, so swallowtail butterflies, it's great, it's attracting different bees and pollinators. But what it's also doing is it's providing nesting materials for birds. And so here the nesting materials were cut off. So you really want, and again, the problem here probably they were worried about the plant self-sowing, which, a lot of the Joe Pies do seed around a little bit. But the seeds are used by birds for nesting. So you really want to leave the seeds on the plant so that they can be utilized by the birds. And it really makes great sense. So then when you look at a Bradford Pallery pear, which we all are familiar with, and especially come April when they're blooming all along different roadways in the turnpike, and you look at the leaves, you go, wow, this is a great plant. Nothing's eating it. But is that good? I don't know. Then you look at our thimbleberry. So this was photographed out in Montana. Interesting enough, Rubus odoratus is a very difficult plant to purchase. And so, and you need two genetically different plants to produce the thimbleberries. And so years back, I bought some from a nursery out west, and they came out bare root, and then I potted them up, but they were all identical. And so they never yielded any fruit because they were all the same, technically the same plant. And I happened to find one nursery up in Bergen County that had a couple of plants left and of different genetic origin. So I added it to the plantings that I had so that I could actually get some fruits off of it. And when you look at the plant, you notice that, look at that flower. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. Notice it's growing in shade. It is an awesome, awesome plant for a 4-foot tall ground cover. And I don't see there's anything wrong with a 4-foot tall ground cover. Provides great pollinator flowers for different, obviously, insects. And then everything eats it. So this is what the caterpillars are looking for, and the bee, this is what they want. And my dad would look at this and say, "Oh dear goodness, we got to spray this thing." And that was the sort of the thinking back in the 60s. But now it's really good. We want everything to eat it, and I mean everything eats it. So when you're out in Montana, you have a lot of moose around, and they like to eat everything. And so when you look at oaks, again, if you look at it from a distance, it looks fine. But when you look at it close up, you notice that there are a lot of holes in the leaves. And then you have a person like Doug Ptolemy, who has a lot of grad students, and suddenly they will go out and they actually count the number of caterpillars and insects that are eating it, and they realize there's 557 species of caterpillar that eat oak. And so just by planting one oak tree, you are supporting a lot of caterpillars, which in turn, that's the primary food for a lot of our songbirds. So that's important to think about. And then we have the soil, something else we don't really think that much about. And so here you got Leonardo da Vinci back in the 1500s saying how we know more about the celestial bodies above us than the soil underfoot. And almost to this day, he is absolutely right. And maybe he is. Because when we look at soil, we don't realize what the diversity of fungus and bacteria and life that there is in the soil. And this is a photograph from out in Montana. And what interests me was that you have 3 segments of life here. So in the center here, you have just sort of some green sedges and grasses, not much happening. Over here, you got some flowering material starting to come into bloom. And then over here, you still have some spruce tree, and you have quite a life system going on. And you go, well, what happened? So this is actually the site of avalanches. So here you had one avalanche that was relatively recent. So the topsoil and the life in the soil is relatively young. Here you have, it's a little bit more mature. So now you have a little bit more maturity to the plant material. And over here, you have a very mature soil level with a lot of fungus in it, and you have mature trees. And so when we used to look at this tree of life, and I don't know if you remember it back in the 60s, but animals were at the top of the chart here, and now it's fungus. So there are more fungus than people, and there are animals. And so I just find that fascinating. And when you think about it, 1 gram or 1 pinch of soil. So when you look at this, 1 pinch of this soil over here, which is well developed, has over 1 billion organisms. So a gram is a tiny amount of soil. So that will quickly explain why animals are no longer at the top of the chart. I just think that's fascinating. And the other thing that sort of brought this home to me is when we were doing a project up in Morris County, New Jersey, and we were putting in a rhododendron garden. And so one of the first projects I had to do was to build this staircase. And so we built it out of old stone, so it immediately looked old. And then started adding in some rhododendrons. Now, you would think that if you added rhododendrons into a soil area that had no ground covers, and it doesn't really matter what it was. It could be astilbe, could be hosta, could be ginger, could be pachysandra. We have some of our native pachysandra right here, procumbens. Could be Solomon seal. It ferns. It didn't really matter. If you planted the rhododendrons into an area that had a ground cover underneath it, we noticed that the rhododendrons did much better at taking hold than those that were planted into a soil without a ground cover. And it suddenly started to become clear that when you sort of predisposed the soil by planting ground covers to start to develop that biozone underneath, and the mycorrhiza, which are the beneficial fungus, which actually help to feed the woody plants and also the perennials, that when you put the woody plants in the rhododendrons, they started to do better at a much earlier stage. You would think the exact opposite. It would have root competition, it would have water competition, it would have nutrient competition, so the plant would not do as well. But it was just the exact opposite. It did better. So that was sort of an early indication to me, and this is going back to the 90s, of what was going on. And we're going to talk a little bit about design. So we'll talk a little bit about spaces. So we bring everything in because I love landscape architecture and landscape design. I'm not a certified landscape architect, but I just love the process. And so the design process, typically you think about it and you go from the biggest material to the smallest material. So you think about shade trees and significant conifers first, then you layer in your small trees, your shrubs, and your herbaceous material. And you think, okay, that sort of makes sense, I guess, but how do you lay out the spaces? How do you know what you want in your garden? So this is a little bit about landscape design, and the process of laying out spaces is called developing the blob diagram. Such a technical term. And so here we are, and this is one done by Roy K. DeBoer, who was Roy DeBoer's son. Roy DeBoer started the landscape architecture program at Rutgers, and he actually came up with this concept of the blob diagram. So when you draw out a circle, it might be where a pool would be, it might be where a patio is, might be where an herb gardener is. Wherever the circle is, that represents a space. And so there's nothing in that space. In between, and when they overlap, that means that one space is connected to the next space. But if there's no overlap, this is where you put the plants. And so very quickly, you're able to just lay out some circles, and you're able to lay out your outdoor spaces where you want things. Since it has no preconceived thought of what that space is going to look like, you don't get muddled down with, oh, what the color spectrum is, what it is. No, it's just a space. We got lawn there, we got a pool there, we got a patio there, and that's all there is to it. And then you start to layer in, and you got your axes views, and these are the view lines that you see, these arrows. And then you start to hard line in a little bit of your patio space and so forth, start to hard line in where everything else goes. And then you put in your shade trees. And in this case, we've got oaks, which is the QC, and we've got red maples, which are the ARs. But we're putting in the shade trees first. And the shade trees are one of the things that really are keeping us alive. And I think everybody remembers the Bee Gees tune. I gotta have a little fun. And so this is some of the stats about shade trees and why they're important. We always think about the shade tree. Oh, it takes 30 years for that to mature. You know, I'm 50 years old. I don't want to wait till I'm 80 for the tree to mature. So let's just put in something else. But by putting in those trees now, is really important. So when you look at how much 1 acre of forest absorbs as far as carbon dioxide and the oxygen released, that 1 acre of forest produces enough for 18 people. Think about how that tree, if you put it next to your house, how it impacts heating and cooling. And you go, well, what does that have to do with nature? Well, it then reduces the electric bill, which in turn reduces the amount of carbon released by a power plant, which then in turn obviously is improving hopefully the world. So, and just by putting a shade tree on the southwest side of your home can reduce air conditioning expense by 30%. Think about that on Thursday and Friday when the temperatures are up to 95 degrees and relative humidities at 70%. So that little red maple there on the right side of that small office at Rutgers Gardens is doing a lot to keep that building cooler. And then this is how architects sort of think about, well, what's the future going to be? Oh, we're going to create this building. We don't need trees anymore. And we'll make it with these long soffits so that it hides the shadows come into the house. And then we'll have these little gun portals, which will be where we look out of because we can't allow a lot of sunlight into the building. And to me, that's really depressing. So, so to me, I don't want that. I'd much rather have greenery around the house. So this was a solution that I saw up at Smith College that I thought was really cool. This is actually photographed down at NC State, J.C. Ralston Arboretum. But here we have a weeping bald cypress, one called Cascade Falls, which I'm not really particularly care of. So it looks like Cousin It. It just needs an eye and it needs to make some squeaking sounds. But if you were to put that up on an arbor, this I thought was really cool and very inventive. I want to live inside that building. In fact, I'm doing this at my house. As I rip down the deck and put up a new one and an arbor over it. What they did is you got 2 Cascade Falls bald cypresses, one here and one here, and then they worked them up on top of the arbor. So think about that. So the green naturally lowers our blood pressure, makes us live longer. It shades the building. It allows the sun in during the wintertime because it's bald. It loses its hair or leaves during the wintertime, so it allows the sun in. And it's just a beautiful sight. Why aren't we doing more of that? And so, so again, look at how trees can improve our environment. This I thought was fun. Texas A&M said that you know, if you do forest bathing, if you go into a woodland and just surround yourself with green trees, within a 5-minute period, your blood pressure will both drop and your muscle tension will drop. So when you look at this, it's high stress. I can see everyone getting really tense right now. But when you see this, makes you relax. And a nice glass of white wine would help too right about now. And that's why when you look at this alley down at Central Park or over in Central Park, and why is Central Park so important? Because people need to be in that green environment, you know, those trees, and just be bathed in a very comfortable, relaxing environment. Last note for trees, and I just sort of love this data stuff. So, so they looked at ladies who were pregnant and had a lot of trees around them, and they noticed that their baby weight was those that had trees, the baby weight was higher than those that did not have a lot of trees. So I look at that and I go, well, that could also mean that people that don't have a lot of income or higher income are in an area where there aren't any trees and are not eating as well, perhaps too. So maybe diet might have an impact there. So I wasn't quite so sure on that one. But the one below it, I really liked. So they looked at emerald ash borer and looked at the records of death before and after. And so they 15,000 additional deaths happened, cardiovascular disease, and 6,000 from respiratory disease. And I put the period in the wrong spot there, got to fix that, after emerald ash borer. So when you look at this, you come home and this is what you had, and you go, oh, look at all that greenery. I feel so nice and calm and soothed. And then you come home to this and you have all the tensions from work and you drop dead from a heart attack. And also you go, well, what's the respiratory disease? So all those trees are actually removing particulate matter from exhausts. Without the trees, without the foliage, the particulate matter is still in the air and you're inhaling it. So trees are doing a lot First thing you should do tomorrow is go out and plant a tree, maybe an oak. Then put in your conifers, and we talked about how windscreens, especially during the winter months, could lower your heating bill by up to 50%. And then you start to add in your shrub groupings in your ground plane. So here we have, this is going back to 2008. This is up at Cascades, up in Hamburg, New Jersey. And this was a project that we did to, and I was starting to get tuned into native plants then, but wasn't quite all the way yet. So, but anyway, we put in dawn redwoods because they were quick growing and I loved the effect. And we underplanted them with our native hydrangea arborescens, or smooth hydrangea. And so here it is a few years later. And the hydrangeas are jamming, the dawn redwoods are jamming. And this is nice because you walk through that nice tight walkway and you come out on the other side and you get this big open amphitheater, which features some tulip trees. And the nice thing about the hydrangeas, they only get to 3 feet tall, so they don't make that walkway through feel pinched, and they grow really well in the shade. And I thought, oh, this is great. But then I started looking at it, and I'm like, where are the pollinators? And you know, it doesn't initially dawn on you. Go, well, it's a plant that's native to the eastern part of North America. That it should have pollinators with it. But in reality, what you have there is a lot of sterile florets. And when you look at your typical hydrangea arborescens flower, look at all the fertile florets that are in the middle, and look at the honeybee that's coming in for a landing. So here we have white dome, which is really big. And here, this is just a couple of weeks ago down at Chanticleer. But here we have Annabelle, or one type, which has a lot of sterile florets, adjacent to, and this is the same species, this is hydrangea arborescens. And here we have adjacent to it a lace cap flower with a lot of fertile florets. And look, and as we were watching it, there were all the bees going to the fertile florets and nobody going to the more showy hortensia type. So again, a native plant is not always a native plant. Durvilla, another awesome plant. And the biggest problem I have with this plant is that, and I really have to talk to the native plant HR department, because this one has 0 sex appeal in the number 3 container. There's something about it in a small container, people walk right by it and don't really imagine all that it can do. But there it is, growing on an embankment in full sun, well drained. This is again back up at Crystal Springs. They have never weeded this. It has been and never had erosion problems other than the mulch eroding down the hill. So this is low maintenance, grows really well in sun, does very well in shade, blooms in the middle of summer, has nice yellow flowers, blooms in mid to late July. Pollinators love it. They're just having a grand old field day. And look where it is. I was up in Franconia, New Hampshire last August for our vacation, since we couldn't really travel anywhere, so we drove to New Hampshire. And there it was, growing in a rock crevice adjacent to a stream, which was 10 feet to my left, in part shade. I mean, look at the harsh environment that it's growing in, and it's thriving. And can I sell that plant at plant sales? No, because people look at it and go, in May on Mother's Day weekend, oh, it's not doing anything. Why do I want this? Great ground cover. More people have to plant that one. Even some perennials have a shrub-like quality to them. So Baptisia, or false indigo, great native plant, long-lived. And if you don't like, sometimes it splays open in the summertime, just give it a haircut, shear it right after it flowers, and then it will reflush, and you won't have the problem with it sort of collapsing or falling over again. But great pea-like flowers, and a great native plant for the garden. So then we go into the herbaceous layer, which is sort of the bottom. So it varies obviously in height, color, and texture. We've got a lot of food for caterpillars, produces a lot of seed for species of birds. Some can act as green mulch. And I'm looking here, and there's very little A that's native, but B, reason I put it in was that it's really lacking in repetition. So one of the things I mentioned at the very start was when you have, we're looking at that one meadow, there was repetition of that white flower. So having one of everything gets rather nervous. Your eye bounces from one plant to another, to another, to another, to another, and it's not very soothing or calming. Whereas when you look at this, you suddenly get calm. And also, again, you have repetition of a lot of plant material, which when it comes into flower, is going to, the pollinators are going to go, ooh, there's the bar we want to go to. There's a lot of, it's well stocked. And so back in 2007, 2008, I was thinking of gardening with painterly sweeps. So it's rather simple. It's easy to do, easy to maintain, because if there is something other than Dallas blue switchgrass in here, clearly it shouldn't be there. And a lot of this was actually, the only thing that was not native was the limelight hydrangeas. Everything else, from the sumacs to the taxodiums to the helianthus down below, were all native. The Joe Pye weed over here. And it gave a really nice flow to it. And so this is the list of plants that we had with it. And just as a get up on my soapbox here, helianthus is a really, really underutilized plant. It's just, you know, people buy, this is October, by the way, so this is mid-October. We're up in Sussex County. It's very cold. And that plant was put in 2008. It's done great ever since. They just cut it back once a year, don't really do much to it. It's at the bottom of the hill, so all the water runs down. It loves that because it likes moisture soils. And it's just a great magnet for the pollinators. But still, what do you see in garden centers? You see mums. You don't see people selling helianthus. So again, I think that's a great showy plant, both for containers and the garden for the fall. And there it is again. And again, worked in with winterberry holly. So the red and the yellow work nice together. And then this was just sort of, I think the pink of the panicum with the pink of the limelights work well. And the limelight repeats the flower head of the shape of the two are rather identical. So, and this was not planned out. This was just a happy accident. So thought that was fun and worked out well. But the problem with the sweeps is that they look a little commercial. And so they may not be the answer that we're really looking for. So I keep, and one of the things that I'm sure everyone else does is that when you do a design, when you do your garden, you look back at it and you go, well, what else could I do? What else could I do? And the more you look at it, the more you go, we could do better. Well, there's something else. So let's start all over again. So let's start back at the ground plane, and let's look at mulch. And so here we have an herb garden. This was at Rutgers Gardens. This was my middle son's Eagle Scout project, and which took a little effort, but he finally got it done. And to his credit, he laid the stones beautifully, did all that very nicely. But then to get him to come back to do the simple stuff, planting the herbs, was just torture. And so gravel is great. People don't think of gravel as a ground cover, but it really does work quite nicely, because when you look at you know, he got the gravel down here, and there he is, and there he's weeding right here. But look at all the weeds back here when the area was not gravel mulched. So clearly, gravel mulch does keep the weeds down. So everyone thinks, ooh, gravel, the weeds come up through it, and shredded bark is better. No, when you're looking for something with a very dry environment, like herbs, which like a very dry crown, or some of our native plants, which like a drier environment, yucca, whatever, Opuntia, prickly pear, the gravel will work great. So something to consider. Shredded bark. Now, the drawback to this is that the leaf litter will get in between it. And as the leaf litter starts to accumulate, then the weeds start to grow in the leaf litter in the gravel. So bit of annoyance. So then you go, well, I'll use shredded bark because I can put this down every year. Drawback to that now is that, well, we're putting it down every year, and that means there's a lot of carbon that goes into producing shredded bark and ground wood chips. So, you know, someone's got to be powering the wood chipper to shred the branches, and someone's got to be powering the grinder that makes the mulch, and then shoveling it to the back of a dump truck, which then brings it to your property. So, so initially this seems sort of green, but the more you think about it, it's like, well, we're producing a lot of carbon to produce this, but. And then we got shredded leaves, and you may not think about shredded leaves very much, but if you go to Longwood Gardens and see what they're doing, their mulch is shredded leaves. And so look at that. That looks pretty darn good. And you don't really think about the mulch. It's just sort of a brown layer there on the ground. But the nice thing about shredded leaves is that they actually allow the water to penetrate a little bit better than when mulch becomes dry. So when mulch, it knits together really tightly, and then it becomes hydrophobic, whereas the leaf litter tends to be a little bit more open and allows the water, the rainwater, to soak in a little bit easier. It also breaks down quite readily into organic matter that can be used by the soil and or taken up by the soil. And obviously, as you cut your lawn and you shred the leaves, you can just put the whole thing into the bed. So so instead of putting them on the curb or putting them somewhere off in the woods, you can actually utilize them in your garden. So just an idea, throwing it out there. And then something I started thinking about 10 or so years ago was living mulch. And so we got these things called sedges, which we initially went, wow, the sedges in Japan and New Zealand are evergreen, or they're, especially in New Zealand, they're orange. They grow orange, and they're really cool. Carex testaceae. But then our native sedges are more or less brown in the wintertime. I don't know if that's that appealing. So so we sort of looked at what was native, and what we didn't really bring it to the forefront of horticulture because it didn't have the same appearance or saleability as a lot of the plants from afar. But then I started looking at these, and so so here's Carex pennsylvanica. And so one of the things that Doug Talmy points out, which I always think is a great point, is a lot of the caterpillars actually drop to the ground to pupate. And they don't go through the change on the branch. They actually drop into the leaf litter, into the whatever material is on the ground to do that. So if you have nothing but lawn underneath your tree, obviously the caterpillars fall into the lawn to pupate, and then they get run over by a lawnmower, and that's the end of that. Whereas if you can produce something like this underneath it, A, it looks good, B, it's weed suppressive, and look at all else that the Carex pennsylvanica does. And 1N is correct, by the way, there. That's not such a bad deal. So if you think about doing these, you may want to contact your local garden center and consider using plugs. So this is a nursery down in South Jersey, and all they do is grow plugs. And I swore up and down I wouldn't release their name of the nursery because they're wholesale only, so they only sell to contractors and to garden centers. But this is how you want to purchase your plants. You don't want to buy them in a 1-gallon container because it gets a little pricey. You want to buy them in plugs because one tray goes a lot further. So here's an area that was shaded. It wasn't, the turf grass was dying off. It was mostly weeds. We put, this is sweet box sarcococca around the outside edge. And yes, I'm sorry, that's not native, nor is it cherry laurel. But this was back in 2002, before I was getting into natives. But here, you know, we said, well, let's put in this panel of Carex pennsylvanica. So there it was. We plugged it in the spring. That's what it looked like in the fall. So, and here it is a number of years later. So here we are on April 17th. Here we are on March 31st. And here we are on August 17th. So proud to say that that panel has never been mowed, never been fertilized. It has never, it's been a little bit weeded, but it hasn't had much care whatsoever. And you can sort of see the old foliage sort of just turns brown and just sort of decays into the ground. So it becomes a carbon sink. So you're not removing anything. It all stays put. And then you could have a little fun with this. If you wanted to, you could get some crocus, Crocus speciosus, not native, but that's okay. You could put a little bit of our autumn blooming crocus in there, get a little blue flowers coming on, and it would just make and you can walk on that too. So don't be afraid to walk on it. And just a great ground cover. And then you could also put perennials in it. So put in native, so that becomes sort of your ground plant. That's where I'm going here. It's a green mulch. If you have full sun, you could consider spirobolus. Prairie dropseed. Again, if you go down to Chanticleer, this is their ruin. and they put the sporobolus in to act like unmowed grass, so that when you look at it, it looks abandoned. Oh, but the seed is beloved by the sparrows and juncos, and this is what it looks like come October. And you say, well, I don't know if I really want that in my front yard, but that's okay. You could have it as a strip along the edge in your backyard, or and then work it in with other plants. It just has a cool, unusual appearance to it. And this is actually the best use I've ever seen of weeping Norway spruce. Typically, they're not my favorites, but this looks really haunted, just like the sort of a ruin should look like. So that's art in theater at its best right there. But there are other plants that you can use. Now, here's our native Pachysandra. Believe it or not, this is a woody plant. It's a subshrub. It's not a perennial, but it provides great bold texture, but it makes a great ground cover for shade, and then it produces these flowers, and the flowers are produced in April. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of our native bees come out in March, and then they die in June. And so what they will do is they will provide a home in a log or in the ground. They'll provide the egg with a small ball of food, essentially, and they will never see their young, which is sort of sad, and then the young will hatch the following March. So that's one reason why it's important to leave some logs around, because that becomes habitat for these. And then the other reason why you want to then start to include some early spring blooming plants. And so native Pachysandra works well. So here you have the new growth right here. Here's the old growth, and then the seeds will develop, and so on and so forth. Pachara, another interesting native plant, great ground cover, a little on the aggressive side, nice yellow flower to it, blooms in late April and May, here adjacent to Phlox stolonifera, oops. And but you can see the Pachara starting to go to seed, but not really seeds around that much. Asarum canadense, another really great ground cover. This is, again, it's deciduous. A lot of the Asian gingers are evergreen, but our native is deciduous. But growing in the worst conditions up in Warren County. I see it growing on exposed banks. It takes it really, really dry and along roadsides and so forth. And the flower is right on the ground. It's amazing. So it's literally laying on the ground. So attracts different flies. And then the ants move the seed. So a lot of people don't like ants. And I have to agree, I don't like a lot of ants crawling on my food. But on the other hand, look at this ginger. Now, this Asarum right here was planted off in the back. And these are all seedlings. They're coming up underneath Virginia sweetspire, Itea. Very shady environment. So here you have a herbaceous plant growing underneath and creating a layer underneath the Itea. That is sheer genius that I never thought about. So it just happened. And so again, how our native ginger really does take a lot of shade. Foam flower, Tiarella, gets its name from tiara, because when you look at each individual flower, it looks like a little crown. So that's how it got its name. Cordifolia has a heart-shaped leaf. Running tapestry just happens to make a nice ground cover, sort of spreads a little bit more rapidly. But Jacob's ladder here, right in between, so you have the blue and the white together. And that combination is now 18 years old and still going strong. So they're good lifespan on that. Then we try to think, well, how can we make it a little bit more rich? And so we added some Claytonia to it and blended some more together. So gives a little bit more, perhaps, of a weedy-ish environment, but at the same token, a lot for the pollinators. And so here's Claytonia. So if you want to change your turf into a whole different feel, just plug some into your lawn and let it seed. And this was down at Rutgers Garden, so we wouldn't seed this area, or we wouldn't mow this area until the flowers had gone to seed. And give or take, that's the end of May, so that's not so bad. And it just was fantastic. And every year it would come up, do its thing, and look at those flowers. And this was taking an area that was, there's not much happening in turf. Now you're making a pollinator heaven. And And of course, there's a couple of dandelions in there just for fun. But anyway, just some thoughts. But or Iris cristata, again, a nice native iris that a lot of people don't think about. It makes a great ground cover. This happens to be powder blue giant, but so is a selection. But look at the flowers to it. And a nice thing about powder blue giant is that they're big, worked in with some grape hyacinths here. But you can also have it in white, so Tennessee white. But the question I will ask, and let's see if anybody can answer this in the chat room. Look at that right down the center there. See that? And why does that crest wiggle? And why would it do that? So and I didn't read the answer. I'm just guessing, but I have a guess. But anyway, and to draw back a little bit, the lines that you see here throughout all of these are intended to attract their nectar lines. They're intended to draw the pollinator, the bees, down underneath the style arm here and to the nectaries down below. So iris are fascinating. So if you haven't really looked into iris, a very complicated flower and a lot of fun. And here's the Iris cristata at the end of the season. So it's not evergreen. It's not going to be a beauty year round, but it's certainly a great ground cover. And this is my front yard. And I'm weeding out the Bruner, by the way, so don't knock me on that one. Another great one is goldenrod. And how many times have we looked at goldenrod and said, oh, it's tall, it's weedy, it's invasive, which it can be all the above. But there are certain ones that are great for shade and for along the edge. So here's the blue stem goldenrod, Solidago. And the nice thing about this is that the roots tend to, as they intertwine together, they encourage deep water infiltration. So we're always, especially of late with all the thunderstorms we've been having, we're always worried about the sheet flow across the ground. But you put in some of these goldenrods, and they actually help with deep water infiltration, which again is helping our groundwater supply, which has been dropping. So, and they're also great for caterpillars. So caterpillars look at this and go, woohoo! So, and then if you're looking for another nice, so the blue stem goldenrod will take quite a bit of shade. Great plant, great edging plant. I photographed this at Buck Gardens in Somerset, New Jersey. This is photographed in my front yard. No, this is at Rutgers Gardens. So this is golden fleece, which I first planted in the sun, and it died. And I was like, how did I kill goldenrod? But this species actually prefers shade. So if you're looking for a nice, and the nice thing about golden fleece is it's more compact. So the straight species gets very leggy. This stays a little bit more compact and makes a beautiful ground cover. So starts to bloom in mid to late August. Blooms for about a month. And so if you're looking for an alternative ground cover that's a goldenrod for shade, there it is. So and then echinacea, which are in full bloom right now, but just leave the seed heads up because obviously the goldfinches absolutely love them. And I loved last winter when I was able to work from home. I'd look out the window and I would see goldfinches in the snow eating the seeds, which was just a wonderful sight. So anyway, we've been at the ground plane, and then how do we move up a little bit? So let's look upwards a little bit. So let's go back to Montana, and you notice that there's not a block of this, there's not a block of that. There are sweeps that are worked throughout, but there's a whole bunch of different things in together. So let's think about meshing the plants together. So what's this layering and blending thing that the frog is talking about? So it's just a wise old frog, and I love that thing. So hopefully everyone's been out to Chicago Botanic Garden, wonderful public garden to go visit. Designed by Wolfgang, Irma, and Van Sweden, a lot of the areas, in particular this one. Wolfgang, who I had the pleasure of meeting, as the name sort of implies, he was native to Germany. Came over to the United States and he was taught actually by Carl Forster, who will see one of his grasses in a second, but who was a great German botanist and horticulturist, but he was influenced most by our prairies. He would go out west and look at how the prairies, how the plants developed in those. And he started to work ornamentals in sort of the same way. And when I was out there, I was fascinated how the large flowered Joe Pye weed here, one called Phantom, sort of goes behind the Carl Forrester. Notice Carl Forrester, there he is, feather reed grass, and suddenly pops out the other side. You see, it's just sort of a hint of it right there. So he wasn't doing a block of this or a block of that. Like Montana, he was sort of mixing the plants together, much like the Russian sage and the coreopsis down below. And so I tried to emulate that. And of course, I failed miserably because look at all the mulch in there. My gosh, there should be a ground. There should be coreopsis. Something should be down there. But I did like the fact that the Joe Pye here goes in, sort of vanishes a little bit, just a little bit of a sight of it, and then it pops out the other side. Makes for a much more interesting garden design. So you could do the same thing with Rudbeckia maxima, which is one of our large, tall flowered black-eyed Susans, and named after Olaf Rudbeck, who was Linnaeus's high school biology teacher's dad. First herbarium back in the 1740s or 30s. But anyway, the point being is that you know, the tall flowers get up above the grasses, and all of a sudden the pollinators go, ooh, look at that. And that's how the plants are designed to be used in the wild. They have these long, tall stems, so they get up above the neighboring grasses so that the pollinators can actually see them. And if it was only 2 feet tall or 1 foot tall, the pollinators would be difficult to see. But so that's the plant sort of telling you that it wants to be fit in amongst some taller grasses. And this is a great black-eyed Susan. Has a nice tall hat to it, and it just, you know, it's fun to look at for there. But then look in the fall, all of those seeds that are available for the birds, and goldfinches absolutely love this. And it's great to watch them because they'll sit on the side of the stem, and the whole stem will slowly bend over under their weight, and they don't care whatsoever. They're pecking away at the seeds, so it provides a lot of animation to the whole seed. And here we have Rudbeckia goldsturm in the front, another plant also named by Carl Forrester, excuse me. So putting these two together, sort of a Carl run here. But then you can actually, you know, there's a lot of our native plants, but even some of the plants from Asia are still magnets for pollinators. So this is Aster tataricus, one called Jindai. So you notice here's the Rudbeckia, it's all gone to seed. We're now in late October. And the nice thing about Aster tataricus is that it blooms well into November. And again, when there's, you know, there's no grocery store in town with any food except for the Aster tataricus, everybody comes to it. So, and this here is mixed in with a willow, one called Salix alba britzensis, which is a red-stemmed willow. And the red stems worked in with the blue flowers, I thought were sort of pretty. Again, happy accident because the aster sort of spreads. So when you look at Wisconsin, you know, there are, you know, the grasses, and the flowers are coming up above the grasses. So the point being is it doesn't need to be tall grasses. You can use in-between size grasses. So this sort of acts as that low vantage point as the green mulch. And then you could also, this was my backyard where I took it was a bluegrass lawn, and took it out of turf, seeded in wildflower mix. We have Monarda fistulosa was our native plant that was predominant. There you can see a hawk moth. But the Joe Pye weed came in with the Joe Pye, the echinacea, the purple coneflower, came in with the Monarda, and it just, it hums. I mean, between the butterflies, the bees, every other insect imaginable, there's a lot to go for. And so, and you know what? We don't have to mow it either. So, and fortunately, I have my son still at home, so he cuts the grass, but I don't have to cut it. But anyway, there's a lot less to cut after I did this, and it's easy to enjoy. And the same thing that was done out in Wisconsin. So they use the prairie drop seed as the sort of the ground plane. So if you don't really, you want something a little bit more structured, a little bit more designed, then you could emulate what they've done here. And so you got Coreopsis grandiflora over here. you've got the Sporobolus, and then you've got the Echinacea pallida, and which has much more slender ray flowers to it, which or florets, which sort of droop down. And when I was younger, I didn't really like that type of flower. I thought everything sort of had to be perky and upright, and I always make a joke that, you know, the older you get and the more you sort of droop over, the more you appreciate drooping flowers. And but I just thought that that is such a cool plant, and so it's, you know, I thought that to me is a beautiful garden. So and again, you know, where do you get inspiration? You get it from the wild. So that's why I'll be going out to Washington State at the end of August with my camera, and my whole family will be way ahead of me, so I'll be lagging behind. But which is mostly just due to the fact that I have a little bit more weight to carry around than they do. But the point is that I can take pictures. And so here you've got Huckleberry, which is the red fall color, and you got the Pearly Everlasting, which is the white. Now, Pearly Everlasting is perfectly hardy here. Huckleberry is a little bit more difficult to find and to grow in. And this is called bear's grass here, by the way. These stalks are coming up. So you could repeat this design, that's the point I'm getting at, by using Virginia Sweetspire instead of the Huckleberry. Because Virginia Sweetspire, easy to get. Henry's Garnet just happens to be one of the most hardy forms, but blooms nicely at the end of May into June. Very attractive, sweetly scented flowers. Then you get fall color. Fall color lasts for 2 months. Oh, what is wrong with that? That is awesome. So it glows red. It stops cars. I mean, it's just great. And then here you have wintertime. And again, the average person would walk by this and go, oh, sort of reddish, but the red stems look great. And so here's a plant which is native from South Jersey down to Florida. So it just makes it into Jersey, but a great pollinator plant, great ground cover. If you don't like that one, you could go with our black chokeberry, excuse me. This is photographed up on the High Line, but again, gets great fall color, nice orangey color to it. And then photo credit to Lisa Stravinsky here down at Pleasant Run Nursery, but comes on with these deep purple fruits. And for whatever reason, the birds don't jump on these right away. So you can get them, you can make jams out of them, you can just eat them right off the plant, very high in anthocyanins, very healthy for you. And then if you leave them on, the birds will eat them. So great plant to use in the garden. I'm not sure why we're not using it more. If you want to sub something in, and I have to go for some of my favorites, go for Rhododendron prunifolium. This is blooming in August, a native azalea blooming in August. Look at those flowers. And you want to go for seedling variability, because here you have one last year blooming in July and another one blooming in August. So it gives a really long period of bloom to it. But, you know, again, middle of summer when nothing's happening, we need those plants. And then sub for the Pearly Everlasting or for the beargrass, maybe the Eryngium here. And it's on the handout, all the various pollinators and insects that it attracts. But it's a stellar plant that, again, most people don't sort of look for too much. This is a design down at Longwood Gardens that I liked. Again, the Carl Forrester feather reedgrass, which, by the way, is sterile, so you don't have to worry about it seeding around. You got the Eryngium over here. Here's that rattlesnake master I showed you before. All the Pycnanthum all throughout here, and over here you got the Asclepias, and back here you got the Rudbeckia maxima. Got a beautiful, predominantly native plant garden right there. And Asclepias is just a butterfly weed or milkweed, just a great plant. Which, believe it or not, the ants are here stealing nectar. So it's, but they're not pollinating it, but they are there. So you have to watch out. And this was at Willowwood Arboretum this past Saturday. And I looked at a whole bunch of different Asclepias. Some of them had, actually only one had ants. The rest of them are pretty free of ants. So don't worry about ants being nectar thieves. So just happens to be where it was planted. Mountain mint or Pycnanthum, great plant for pollinators. Oh, they love it. Always on it. Always happy. Think about repeating the flower. And this was just a happy accident, but and notice there's a lot of those. But here's the Veranocastrum, which is Culver's root, and here's Aesculus parviflora. And this was photographed obviously on July 16th. And then the upright spiky form, the upright spiky form. Again, it's repeating, which I think gives a nice soothing element to the garden. And you're probably saying, well, the Aeschylus is about done. What good is that? Well, and so here's right now, this is the plant of the month for MJAES. So if you go to this website, go back. You'll read a little bit more about Culver's root. That was named after Dr. Culver, who may not actually ever have lived. But in any case, a lot of native pollinators on this. And then pick, so here's bottle brush buckeye, but pick a later blooming one, like one called Rogers. This is in full bloom at the end of July. So then you would get the two overlapping. And look at the swallowtails on it. And he's having a great time, or she's having a great time, not even paying any attention to me whatsoever. Or you could repeat it with the submissive fuga, which we started out with. So again, that would make a nice pairing with just the straight species. So if you want to repeat the form of the flower. So anyway, just sort of a nice thing to think about. If you got wet sites, don't think of it as wasteland. It's nature's rain garden. And this was the first plant that I divided and dug up and moved back in 1965 when I first moved to my parents' house. I was 7 years old, but you know, I just thought there was something about the plant that really attracted me. So and this is that plant. So this was at my parents' house before I sold it, and here it was. This was 2019 when I sold it. That's what it looked like then. And I moved it in 1965. Never been divided, nothing done to it. Look how great that plant looks. A lot of people go, oh, there's so much work. Nothing. So that's a great plant. So think about using that in the garden, especially if it's a little bit moist. Blue flag iris, another one. This was, I photographed this spring up in 517 in Hackettstown, New Jersey. This is native population, but see how it doesn't just, again, make a block unto itself. It slowly spreads outward and filters into the next planting. And I have, Lord knows what this plant is, but anyway, I just thought it was just nice how it sort of feathered into the next planting. And again, look at those nectar guides. Oh my gosh, that's awesome looking. Cattails, you got to be a little bit careful because they get a little aggressive, but again, great for red-winged blackbirds, and again, good in wet site conditions. And this is an artificial rain garden that we created years back at the Rutgers Gardens. And so we got the red cardinal flower. We've got pitcher plants here, and then the ground cover underneath, which really sort of pulled it all together, was the sedge, Carex brevoire. So cardinal flower, everybody knows that, great for hummingbirds. Remember one day I was weeding, and two ladies came over and sat down, and they were there for 10 minutes. They go, "Where are the hummingbirds?" I was like, well, you have to have a little patience. And so 20 minutes later, they showed up. And then here's the pitcher plants, just awesome plants. And if you have children, grandchildren, neighbors' children, whatever, get some of these. They will be so fascinated to find dead bugs inside them. They will never, ever leave horticulture again. And we need more horticulturists. So, but the key to pitcher plants is they like infertile soil, and make a great container plant. But again, just put them in peat, a little bit of sand. That's all they need, and never fertilize them, because they get all their fertility through capturing the bugs in those pitchers. And here's the Carex brevoire, plains oval sedge. So here's what it looks like in April. Here's what it looks like in June. Obviously a very wet, boggy site. And here's what it looks like in October. So, but it does really well in well-drained soils as well, because I planted it in my front yard, which is not a bog. So this is one of the three principal sedges found in the prairies out west. Tough plant. One you might want to consider adding to your garden, and low maintenance, never cut it back. And then add water. You know, we talked about it before, but wildlife needs water. So just by, this is all artificial, little spring house, but just by having the water recirculate up and come down again, attracts all sorts of birds, salamanders, and different wildlife. So that's important. And lastly, maybe you got some deer, maybe you got some moose, and they're still in Montana as far as I know, but one which I see it out in the wild. I've seen this on the in Alamucci, New Jersey, walking some of the trails, is doll's eyes. And so this is a poisonous plant. Deer don't eat it. I saw it growing with barberry, and unfortunately, and but it really does look like a doll's eye, and the old porcelain eyes. And it scares my middle son to death. He runs mountains, is a Spartan racer. That's what he does for fun. And this plant scares him to death. So go figure. But great plant for shade. Fruits come on August into September. Just gives a really interesting look in the fall. Bottle brush buckeye. We talked about this before. This is a 100-year-old plant, so you can see how big they get. But this was photographed last Saturday, and just fantastic flowers on it for middle of summer. Just when you need something, you got it. Oh, that is a great, great plant. And look at the fall color. My gosh. And, again, hard to sell this plant at plant sales because, again, a number 2 or 3 container. Very little sex appeal, but you get it out in the garden, it's like, oh, wow, gotta have that. Or here we are up in Johnny Jump State Park, right off of Shades of Death Road, classic road to be on. We've got Dutchman's breeches, and comes out in the spring, blooms its head off, is dormant by mid to late May, but quite poisonous. Don't want to have it anywhere near cattle or horses, but look at the flowers. They look like a pair of long johns blowing upside down the breeze. Just a great plant for working into the woodland garden for those early pollinators, because they're looking for food. They need that sustenance. And then last we talked about mountain mint, just a great plant, highly deer resistant, great pollinator. So anyway, I encourage you to listen to the frog. Look how happy the lady is that's sitting next to the frog. She's joyous. And the poor lady to the left without the frog, not looking very happy at all. And I did ask both of them for their permission to shoot that, and they both said yes. So photograph that down in Atlanta. And the problem is, and convince millennials, these folks, the people that like houseplants but haven't ventured outside yet, we got to convince these folks that we need native plants, we need to plant trees, we need to be a little bit more involved and get outside and do horticulture. And these are my 3, and of course, they enjoy it. This is a couple of years ago, we were out in Utah. But would they ever let go of their phone? I was just amazed that every time we got a signal, there they were on their phone again. So, but in any case, all good stuff. So, in any case, welcome any questions, but there's my email address, and it's on the handout as well. And if you have any questions, I mean, again, there's so many ways you can go with this, but this was focusing more on designing, and that's why I was focusing on ground planes, ground covers, repetition of form, creating spaces, and how we can use native plants to really enhance our outdoor environment. Is anyone awake out there?
Oh, they're awake. Wait till you hear all the questions in the chat.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And everyone is like saying how fantastic your talk is.
Yeah.
One of the early questions was about, let me find it, I'm sorry. When you showed the diagram with the blobs on it, the question was, how do you figure the future tree size on with using the diagram?
Okay, so shade trees typically grow to a diameter, give or take, of 60 to 80 feet at maturity. What you want to look at is what will the tree look like in 30 feet, 30 years. And in 30 years, it typically is going to have a spread of about 25 to 30 feet. So typically you use that because 30 years is sort of a realistic number that you're shooting for.
There was a question about the Carex pennsylvanicus. Does it go to seed?
It actually does not seed. It's all, when I showed you that propagation greenhouses with all the plug trays, those were all divided asexually. So it is not a seeder, it's a spreader. So it's rhizomatous. And so you don't have to worry about seeds. And don't ask me how it spreads around. I don't know, but it's not a seeding problem.
Okay, some of these you actually did answer. So Hold on. I think there was a question about ticks, but Sue answered that one.
Yeah, you got a lot more questions than I did, Karen.
I know that a lot were coming to just the host. This is an interesting question. We have an ant issue. Are there any plants that discourage ants?
I haven't seen one or know of one yet. What has fascinated me is every time I do a close-up of a flower, lo and behold, there's an ant running across it. So it's we're used to them in peonies, but pretty much you name it. I was photographing some stone crops, sempervivum, hens and chicks, the other night, and which is not native at all. And lo and behold, there's a ant on the flower. So I don't know of any that do discourage it. No.
Hey, there's a question about the best time to plant native plants, or does it vary depending on the individual species?
There really is not a good or bad time. You can plant as long as you can get water to it, which lately doesn't seem to be a problem. But as long as you can irrigate, you can plant herbaceous material easily right up until mid-October. Once you go beyond mid-October, it starts to get a little bit iffy because you don't get the roots established into the ground around it. But anytime from late March, early April through mid-October is fine.
Okay, this question is from Suzanne. She said she planted a wildflower meadow about 6 years ago using seeds. She didn't use plugs, but she says, now I have a lot of weeds. It's looking a little unruly. Do you have any suggestions? She said she weed whacked it in the fall, I guess last fall.
So if there's nothing there that's desirable, you might want to do give it a light rototill just to break up the sod a little bit, and then do another mix. And typically, if you put the seed down in the fall, so that it allows it, put it down in late October, November, get the seed then, so that it then goes through the winter and fertilizes, and then is able to germinate in the spring. You might have a pretty good success. If you put the seed down in the springtime, you might have lost a lot due to summer drought or the initial year. So sometimes it's good to put the seed down in the fall. Go with an aggressive mix. Go with bee bombs, cone flowers. I had one Lilium canadense come up in 1 acre of seeding, and then the darn deer ate that one. So I was a little bit annoyed, but anyway, I had one lily.
Okay, someone is asking, what's your recommended approach to converting a large area of mature shade trees with mowed weed and turf below, converting that to ground cover?
Do it small. Pick out your paths. Where do you want to walk? And then once those are laid out, then start kill off the grass. It's pretty easy to do with putting down cardboard and then putting wood chips over it if you don't want to use herbicides. And then plant through that and think about where, if you have a moister area, think about ferns. Drier areas, give more towards upper areas such as goldenrods, which I like a little bit on the drier side, and then repeat material. So pick out 5 to 8 plants that you really like, and then repeat those throughout. You're not going to do it all in one season, but by having that list and then repeating those, you'll have a nice consistent garden that'll be a lot more attractive than having, I did this area this year, and then this area over here I did next year. It's totally different material. So, but if you repeat the materials as you go along, it will have a much more natural appearance to it.
Okay, a question from Leslie. For windy conditions, what type of tree do you recommend?
Windy?
Windy.
Well, if you're looking for dead tough, go with Celtis, which is hackberry. Hackberry is one of your toughest native plants. Oaks will tolerate wind extremely well. Use both of those. Another good plant for wind. Don't use pin oak. Use white or some of the other oaks. Pin oak tends to like a little on the moisture side. Black walnut, believe it or not, loves windy, dry sites, but you probably don't want black walnut. And believe it or not, cherry, our native cherry is another great one for adding. Not only does it tolerate wet or windy sites, but it's also a great plant for attracting caterpillars, which will attract more birds.
Okay, Cheryl says, my native plants, which she planted last fall, are under assault by Asiatic garden beetles. She's been handpicking them and putting them into soapy water, but she said, do I have any chance of winning?
Yes. I'm doing the same battle. I'm winning.
Just have to keep up on it, right?
Yep. Well, they were attacking my tall Coreopsis tripteris, and I first saw them on it, and I was like, "What's that?" And then I realized what they were because they already destroyed part of the growth tip, and so I've been out there with soapy water every day since, and I'm winning.
Someone has planted a spice bush and doesn't know if it's male or female. Do you have any advice on how to tell which one it is?
Ooh, it's challenging. I mean, when you look at the flower in the spring, it'll have both male and female parts on it, but if it's a female, the stigma that will be far larger, or if it's a male, the anthers will be more developed. It really comes, it's nice if you have another one to compare it to, because then you can see which part is more developed. But I did that years ago with a holly tree, and I thought for sure I had a male, but lo and behold, I didn't realize that the females still have male parts. They're just not developed. So Susan thought that was funny. I'll get a lot of emails on that one.
Do you have any suggestions or resources for designing native plantings in small spaces like urban areas?
No, I don't have any resources. I think one source that I would go down to Mount Cuba, which is in Delaware. It's a fantastic native plant garden. Everybody should go there regardless. But just to go there and walk around and steal ideas, and don't borrow them, just steal them, and see what works for you, because they have both sunny areas and shady areas, and they've done a phenomenal job on combining plants, and just steal their ideas, because it's a lot better to see stuff than it is to read a book, because you can always take a good picture, but when you see it in reality, you can see what looks good or bad.
What's a good substitute for butterfly bush?
Well, there's no true substitute for butterfly bush, that's for sure. But if you're looking, if size is not an issue, then the bottle brush buckeye gives you that same effect and is great for butterflies. That's fantastic. I'm trying to think what else would attract butterflies. I mean, I have great luck with Monarda fistulosa. If you're looking to attract butterflies, Monarda fistulosa blooms in August, and get a couple of different plants because they bloom at different times. It's a lot of seedling variability, and mix that in with a little bit of mountain mint, the pycnanthemum. Those are just killer pollinator plants to attract butterflies.
Do you have any plant suggestions for planting on a steep rocky slope in part shade? This person had English ivy and got rid of it and wants to replace it with something good.
could that person email me and I will put together a list? Because there's certain things, Iris cristata would do well, but you don't want to do just one plant. So what you want to do is like to put together a list of plants. The Asarum canadense, I've seen growing on sheer roadside cuts in heavy shade, highly well drained, along with Christmas ferns, and they do really well. So point is, you're not going to replace English ivy with just one ground cover. You're going to be replacing it with a diversity of plant material. It makes it a little bit more challenging. But I'd be happy to put together a list for you and send it to you.
I almost forgot that idea. Someone's asking for recommendations for a ground cover under live oaks.
Live oak, wow. Well, I mean, now we're going to the goldenrod would do well, which we've mentioned. We had 2 suggestions there. We could do a Asarum, we could do maidenhair fern, we could do Christmas fern, we could do, I think of some other fun ones we haven't talked about yet. You could do a lot of the sedges. Well, we talked about the nice thing about oaks is that they have such a deep root system to them that you can grow a huge diversity of plant material under them, and throw in a few of the rhododendron prunifolium. They like light shade, and just to give you that orangey red pink impact in August is just, first time I saw it at Longwood Gardens, I couldn't believe what was flowering in the middle of August. So.
I think that covers most of the questions. Otherwise, we could be here all night. But
good. It's beer time.
But I guess, I mean, Bruce, would you mind if some people have additional questions or think of something later if they shoot you an email with their questions?
Right away.
All right.
No, always feel free to reach out.
Okay, and I just want to relate to you, like, so many people are thanking you and saying this is the best presentation they ever heard. It was so engaging. So I just want to pass on, and so full of information. I just want to pass those compliments on to you. And second, it's sure. Thank you very, very much. We always learn so much from you. And just to remind the folks that are still on, that are listening, that the link to the recording will be put on our website tomorrow. And there's also a great handout that Bruce provided with the list of all the plants that he talked about tonight. So you don't have to worry if you missed anything. Just, use the handout. And thanks.
And
thanks.
in the chat, Karen, in the chat, I did put I know there's a reverberation. I did put my email address for anybody that has extra questions that maybe didn't know, need somebody more local in Ocean County. So you can call the RCE. We'll get you answered. Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Thank you.
Yeah, Susan Servideo. She's the horticulturalist, and Dr. Steve Yurzow from Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Thank you. So thank you, Bruce. Much appreciated. Awesome as always.
Good night, everybody. Good to see everybody.